Okay, welcome back to another REACH Law webinar. So today we're going to talk to you about the UK REACH regulation and specifically give you an update on the registration process. And we have the usual suspects as presenters today, experts. So it's myself, Fredrik Johansson. I'm a partner, head of sales at REACH Law, chemical engineer by background. I've been working at REACH Law already for more than 12 years, but have a even longer background in EHS and chemical regulatory topics. And today, of course, we'll be focusing on and discussing UK REACH. And I'm joined by Pietro. So Pietro, please, if you can introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking part to this webinar. My name is Pietro Di Tondo. I'm the regulatory manager of the UK subsidiary, part of the REACH Law family. And I've joined REACH Law in 2021 when we opened for business to support our clients with UK REACH related issues. My background is chemistry. I have a degree in chemistry and a postgraduate degree specializing in X-ray crystallography and over a decade of experience within the regulatory frameworks within Europe and UK.
Thank you, Pietro. Okay, so again, some practical information about this webinar. So you can send out questions during the webinar using the chat function, and we'll try to answer those as best we can during the Q&A session, looking at depending on how long this webinar will take. And the questions you've been sending in during your registrations, we will answer those at the end also. We'll start with those. And if there are any tricky questions or questions we didn't quite understand, then we'll come back to you separately by email. And of course, you are welcome to also proactively get in touch with us. So a recording of the webinar will also be made available on the YouTube channel. So please feel free to have a look at that within a few days after this webinar ends. So, and of course, in any case, please do send us feedback. We appreciate that very much, and of course allows us to develop our webinars further. Okay, so the agenda today is very busy as usual. A lot of text, a lot of slides, a lot of talk, maybe some bad jokes, but we'll try to conclude this in 60 minutes, albeit I have a strong suspicion that we'll go over 60 minutes, so please bear with us. So we'll start with REACH Law in brief, then we'll look at the, just give you a quick overview of UK REACH. We look at the registration, the basics, then look at the extension of the registration deadlines, how the NRES process works. I think we got a lot of questions on that. Then we'll look at the new registration model, basically what we know so far, and then conclude with conclusions and the Q&A part. And I can see that my monitor is blank, but I can see that you can see the slide, so that's enough. So REACH Law in brief. So we provide support for REACH and REACH-like chemical regulations globally. And this, of course, now also encompasses UK REACH and GBCLP, obviously. Besides that, Turkey, KKD, so the Turkey REACH regulation is something that we're also very busy with at the moment, and on top of course, the basic EU REACH chemical regulation. On top of that, we also support our clients for K-REACH, albeit that we do through our partner in South Korea. When India REACH enters into force, we will do and will support that natively through our office actually in India. So here you can see our office location. So we do have an office in Manchester, well, where Pietro is joining this webinar. I'm from Finland, the head office. Then we have a small office also in Brussels, a bigger one in Istanbul for KKD purposes, and then also an office in India, providing currently local support for our clients there for these chemical regulations. So we provide a full suite of chemical regulatory services, going from the more basic, if you will, services such as only representative services in these locations to the more demanding lead registration work, authorization work, consulting, training, classification, labeling work, etc. For UK REACH specifically, here again we provide a full set of services, starting again with the only representative services through our office in Manchester. Then the late DUIN notifications is something we do. Deferred registrations, the NRES is something we do a lot. Inquiries, lead registrations, co-registrations, authorizations, and a lot more. But we'll go into these in more detail during the presentation, at least to some degree. And as alluded to earlier in some of the slides, we do have a YouTube channel called REACH Law Talks, where we will be posting these webinars, the recordings thereof. So I invite you to have a look and follow us there, and of course subscribe and even like our videos if you like them, and find them informative, of course. Probably could recommend a few videos that you could check if you haven't already checked those related to UK REACH, and these are the UK REACH, what's late doing and what's ahead of for the chemical industry, and also a webinar on UK REACH lead registration and data sharing from some months back, and then also a more generic webinar on also including UK REACH only representative and confidential business information and supply chain considerations. With these webinars, we go into much more detail into some of the practical processes of the UK REACH regulation and only representation. Because I saw in the lead up to this webinar, when you registered, you had quite a lot of basic questions related to DUINs and only representation. So I invite you to have a look at these webinar recordings on our YouTube channel for more specific information on these, because today we will not go into that much detail into DUINs, for example, or only representatives. We'll focus on the registration process and the latest developments thereof. Okay, just to give you a quick update on what's going on in the regulatory world, at least when it comes to the REACH-like chemical regulations. So in the EU, obviously, there's the REACH review process ongoing, so something that we're looking forward and following very closely. And of course, there are a lot of update requirements for dossiers and safety data sheet update requirements and so forth going on. So EU REACH is very active at the moment, and will increase. The activity will just increase, I would suspect, in the coming months and years. For Turkey, I would say the activity is even more hectic there, because the registration deadline is end of next year, and we are now working a lot with just onboarding clients to pre-register substances and lead registering a lot of substances for the Turkish market. Next year we will start focusing more on the co-registration, so the member registration, if you will, as part of the joint submission. But one of the practical problems in Turkey is that there are not enough lead registrants yet for covering all the substances. So there's a big gap there for the time being. Hope we will, and the industry will be able to plug that gap during next year, so that we can all meet the registration deadlines. Then in India, there's still no tangible information about when India REACH per se will enter into force, but we're expecting it maybe next year. Only time will tell, but that is something that is slowly, I guess, brewing in India. And then for K-REACH, of course, the first registration deadline is already passed for the CMR substances and the higher tonnage band substances, but for the lesser tonnage band substances, the registration deadline is still ahead, which is end of 2024 for the 100 to 1,000 ton substances. Okay, that was just a quick roundup of what's happening, and now just the usual disclaimer and copyright information. So any actions you may take based on this presentation is of course on your own responsibility and risk. So we will not accept any liabilities or warranties and so forth for the contents of this presentation. So if you want specific advice, then please contact us specifically for your case, and then we will render such services to you. Okay, so we'll just hand over to Pietro to go through UK Reach and give you an overview thereof. And I will just kill my video feed to conserve a bit of bandwidth. So Pietro, please go ahead and just let me know when to change slides.
Sure. Thank you, Frederick, for the introduction. So yes, we are starting to give everyone an overview on UK Reach. So let's start with the first slide, please. So UK Reach is what is. So UK Reach is defined as EU-Reach as it was on the 31st of December 2020, plus all the statutory instruments that were implemented shortly after that, plus the implementation of all the different regulations, which now is being consolidated and available on the websites listed in the slide. Next slide, please. So the main requirements of UK Reach are similar to EU Reach. So there are registration, authorization, restriction, use of compliance, and communication. The focus on the webinar today is to talk about the registration. So all the substances that are manufactured in or imported into the GB at the annual volume starting from 1 ton or more per annum. Similarly to EU Reach, no data, no market rule apply. Next slide, please. So the important consequence of the UK Reach based on the legal role is change. So we witnessed a shift from what it was before the implementation and to what happened after, from the day of its implementation that took place on the 1st of January 2021. So we have the GB manufacturer and the EU Reach are still the GB manufacturer and the UK Reach. Then the GB importer sourcing from non-EU or EU or Northern Ireland country became GB importer and the UK Reach. And then the main difference was the GB downstream users and GB distributors sourcing chemical from EU, Northern Ireland and European Economic Area now became a GB importer and the UK Reach. GB import must be covered as a UK Reach registration. In summary, there are 4 legal roles under UK Reach, and these are manufacturer, importer, downstream user, which consider formulator or end users, and finally the distributors. Thank you. Next slide. So as far as existing supply concern, is an important implementation of this new regime that is the UK Reach. So the UK Reach transitional measures, including downstream user import notification, apply to all the substances that were in active trade in the UK during 2019 or 2020 at any annual volume. These are the substances that are therefore considered existing supply. Only GB importer and only representative can submit a DUIN notification. If a substance were actively imported into the GB market covered by a EU or NOR, a UK can appoint, and a UK OR can therefore be appointed, and then the DUIN notification can cover this type of obligation. The G importer must also show the active trade and importing from a different supplier. So they have to have a proof for showing this in order to be compliant with this frame. Next slide, please. This slides simply summarize. So in all other case, you must first inquire and then register before placing the substance of the market. And this is no real news. This is what used to happen just even without Brexit, as it was on the EU Reach framework. So the UK Reach must be first inquire and then submit a new registration. And this is now called new registration of existing substance. Next slide, please. So the transitional act required as far as concern the registration related. We summarize this is in a slide. So the first proper deadlines and the UK REACH was the grandfathering deadline, which occurs on the 30th of April 2021. So this was applicable to all existing GB company or GB held EU REACH registration. So they could simply apply for this in order to keep the registration alive and implement it into the UK market. The second deadline officially was on the 27th of October 2021, and this was called the downstream user import notification deadlines, where the GB importers of substance from the EU or outside the UK were by only representative could have submitted this kind of notification. That being said, the HSE, the UK authorities, have proven to be very pragmatic and applied an extension, which is now called late DUIN, but we will discuss that at a later stage. In order to simplify the process, then similar to what happened with the EU REACH, 3 different deadlines were implemented, which are based on the different tonnage bands. And officially and currently, under law, this will apply for 2023, 2025, and 2027. That said, there's been an extension, which we'll further discuss in the following slide. Next slide, please. So only substance and the existing supply can be notified at a later stage by the GB imported via the DUIN process. Only representative covering the G important that fulfill the same existing requirement must also be applied. Next slide. So the good news, as I was saying, if you're not DUIN notified, you should you now need to go back into the UK REACH compliant and submit a late DUIN as soon as possible. There's not been given a date or until this window will still be open, but purely speculative guess, we will say that this will continue at least until the first registration deadlines. Also, we will monitor it very closely, and we suggest for everyone to continue to monitor this. Next slide. So as far as authority and system and the UK REACH, so the role that is performed by ECHA and the UK is performed by the HSE, which is stand for Health and Safety Executive. As far as the system use, so the EU REACH use the REACH-IT tool, and the UK REACH, we have a comply with the UK REACH-IT system. This we've been noticing that this is constantly improving. So as far as we know, and we witness is improving day by day. So these are the 2 main system use on the UK REACH. Next slide. So some statistic that we assisted, there are no exact figure, but as far as number concerned, the downstream user import notification submission were over 1 million. So big numbers there. As far as submitting for legal entity, there were over 5,000 submitting legal entity. And then we can see the grandfathering process for substances were over 4,000. And there's some differences between grandfathering and UK REACH, but we are assisting a huge interaction. On top of this, there are also new registration of existing substances that have been submitted so far, and we are assuming it'll be over 500. And for novel substance, data that came from mainnet then be published, there are 20 to 50. So novel substance are substances that were not registered either under EU REACH. So fully new substance or molecule that are being registered until, since the UK REACH has been applied. Next slide. So in this slide, we summarize a bit of a brief comparison between EU REACH and UK REACH. So the pre-registration and the UK REACH is no longer possible, as compared to what can happen in the UK REACH when downstream user import notification can still be applicable, but obviously this is a short window. And it makes sense because the deadlines and the UK REACH are still live and available, whereas in EU-REACH, there's no more deadlines for the tonnage band. So if you want to register a substance, you need to register straight away. Otherwise, no substance, no market rule apply. As far as the inquiry concern, these are both applicable under EU-REACH and UK-REACH, because in order to register, you always need to inquire first. Registration, similar rules apply between the two frameworks. So every chemical at above equal to above a ton per annum need to be registered. Although, as we say in this slide, the registration deadlines depending on different tonnage band is still applicable, but also will soon be delayed, and we will tell in the following slide. Grandfathering was never applicable in the EU-REACH, but it was under UK-REACH, although this has passed, so it's now deadlines is accepted. So polymers exempted similarly, but the monomer unit must be registered. So this is something that everyone needs to be careful. Yes, you might produce polymer, but please make sure your monomer unit is registered. This means that you not necessarily fulfill the tonnage band, but it's important to keep track of the monomer units used for your registration. The data requirements, these are similar principles. So with the higher tonnage band, additional data are required for the registration to show the nature of the substance. So more data for additional tonnage band. Joint registration on the representative, these are all similarities between the two frameworks, and then R&D and also PORD exemption also the same, and also product notification and safety data sheet, all similarly between the two different frameworks. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, we would like to remind everyone that although not all the registration are the same, the UK will definitely not be the Wild West, and the HSE are doing a really great job at catching up with this with the system and making sure they're monitoring all the framework and also all the registrants, only representative, but also company within the UK that are producing or importing substances. Thank you. Next slide. So now we want to talk a bit more in details of the basic of the registration. So we can start with the next slide on the basic. So as a simple overview, all manufacturer or imported substance as such as mixture, as previously said in the earlier slide, that produce the product, 1 ton or more must be registered. The registration tonnage band are similarly to what is under REACH. So you got the 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 1,000, and over 1,000 ton per annum. The registration type are 4 different specifically, and these are full registration for a full substance. So then we have an on-site isolated intermediate, which is strictly controlled conditions must apply. SCC is always referred as. And then the transport and insulating intermediate, where the SCC must apply in the whole supply chain. Very important to keep that in mind. Then we got the joint submission, when you got 1 substance and 1 registration, that you have a lead registrant plus all the various co-registrants, and then you got the data and cost sharing. This need to be fair and transparent and not discriminatory. And then keeping all the information up to date and whatever new requirement is needed. So new tests might be required at a later stage for different tonnage bands. So next slide, please. So we have simply put the concept in a slide. Hopefully it's visually effective for everyone. So basically you got, for the joint submission, you got the lead registrants that either have done this by grandfather or transitional value or by an NRES approach, leading the pack, and then all the various co-registrants that will apply for a joint submission to the HSE. And this is applicable by the different tonnage band airline. So this is a brief summary of the concept of joint submission, which is similar to what under EU REACH. Next slide, please. So as far as the basic for registration related deadlines, so although everyone must have heard the news that there is an extension of registration, the substance at the moment, the current legal text has not changed, but it will soon change. So before placing the substance in the market, again, similar to EU REACH, this 1 ton or more per year must be registered. So the first deadline, which has passed, was the grandfathering deadline, which was applicable to all GB-based EU REACH registrant holder. Then you have the downstream use and import notification deadlines, which was applicable to the GB importers of substance from all the parts, so EU and only representative, they'll need UK registration. So this was officially on the 27th, but as already said, on the 28th, the late DUIN has been applicable and came alive. And now where we are today, so where are the 3 different deadlines based on tonnage, which are summarized in the slides, and currently is 2023, which will soon shift to 2026, 2025, and then that will shift to 2028. And the final tonnage bundle line, which was the 1 to 100 ton a year, was 2027, which will soon shift to 2030. So this is in a nutshell all the deadline, but for now it's not law yet. So please refer to the 2023, 2025, and 2027 until it's officially communicated and implemented by law. Next slide, please. So this is resume the transitional measure and the 3 different routes that have been offered under the UK REACH regime. So the first one was the grandfathering. So that is passed on the left, going in the center for joint registration. Then you got the DUIN route, downstream user import notification. Is still available. So if you're not sure of if you think you might be applicable, please do so and submit the DUIN registration or nominate an only representative that can do it for you if you're based outside the UK. And then finally is the NRES, which is new registration of a existing substance. So this need to be registered for substance that didn't fall under the window of 2019 or 2020, but you can still apply this. So must first send an inquiry and then submit a new registration substance notification and dossier that will allow you to continue with the registration. Next slide, please. So as far as the registration fees, this is a table to summarize everything, but let's specify this is for large size enterprise only. And this was basically was a conversion exchange value rate at the time of the UK REACH implementation, as it was on the 1st of January 2020. So now the value between euro and pounds is different, but this has been fixed at the time of the implementation. So these are the fees for the different tonnage band. Thank you very much. Next slide. And I'll pass this next section to Fatih now.
Thank you, Pietro. Okay, so now we will look at the registration deadline extensions and who's affected and what we are looking to happen next in the whole thing. So as you already know, I think most of you, there was a discussion about postponing the transitional registration deadlines that Pietro already went through for the purpose of giving more time for the government to come up with this new registration model and also give ample time for the government then to implement these changes into law and so forth. So that's why the government was looking to propose to have these registration deadlines postponed. And as a result, there was a public consultation held by the government, by DEFRA, in the summer and beginning of the autumn this year, simply to provide feedback from stakeholders, so from companies such as yourself, on their feedback on what postponements of these registration deadlines would be desirable. So what we had as part of the consultation, essentially there were three options for these registration deadline. As so one would have been option 0, to retain the current deadlines. There would be no changes. Then we had an option 1, which added 3 years to each registration deadline based on the current legal text. So you would have it, the first deadline in 26 instead of 23, and the other one 28 instead of 25, and for the smallest tonnage band in 2030 instead of 27. And the last option, option 2, would have been that you add 3 years to the first deadline, 2 years to the second, and then just 1 year to the final deadline, keeping all the deadlines during this decade. However, this option 1 was selected as the winner, if you will, of this consultation, and out of the almost 290 respondents, more than 80% wanted this option 1, which isn't a big surprise. What is maybe a bit of a big surprise is that there were not that many responses. I would have assumed that more people would have been interested in providing feedback to this consultation. But nonetheless, I think the overwhelming majority of people who didn't vote would have probably also voted for option 1, and that being the option that won. Then I think we are all happy with that. So you can see that most of the respondents to this consultation were actually from large businesses, in essentially mostly based in Great Britain, but also outside, who have vested interest in Great Britain. And of course, also consultancies were able to provide responses, and Reach Law, for example, was one of the ones who responded to this consultation also. So what will happen next is that now we have settled for this 3-year extension. So we have the highest tonnage band, the CMR substances, the substances available on the candidate list as of the time of exit from the EU, will have the first registration deadline happening 27th of October 2026. So three years additional to what it is according to the current legal text. Then we had the substances from 100 to 1,000 and candidate list substances as of October 26. This is a bit of an assumption from my part. It used to be at 23, but I think this also will switch 3 years ahead of time. We'll see how that pans out. But those will have a registration deadline on 27th of October 2028. And then for the 1 to 10, 10 to 100 ton substances, so everything else will have a registration deadline going into the next decade already. So 27th of October 2030. And just to note that these deadlines apply to grandfathered registrations, so registrations that were held by GB-based entities under EU REACH, then companies who intend to submit or have submitted DUINs, and then these new registration of existing substances. We'll come back to this in a few in the section coming actually after this one. So we'll go more in detail, but these are the ones who will benefit from these transitional registration deadlines. New substances must still be fully registered before placing 1 ton or more of the substance on the GB market. So this is very good to understand. So most of the industry welcomed this 3-year extension, as we already saw, but they provided a bit of criticism that it has taken a year to get to this point. And I certainly can understand that also. So who will be affected? So obviously, everyone who grandfathered their registrations into UK REACH from EU REACH, so those will have to then submit and become members of the joint submission by the applicable registration deadline, depending on the tonnage band of their substance and the type of substance. And all those who submit the DUINs are still going to submit so-called late DUINs and intend to go ahead with the registration will have to then, of course, also abide by these or can benefit from these delayed extended registration deadlines. And also those who submitted these deferred registration, so the first part of the new registration of existing substance process, which Pietro will talk about in a few slides. So all of these will be, I would say, positively affected in the sense that they do not have to scramble to do things starting next year, but can do so in 3 years' time, provided, of course, the changes, the extensions are brought into UK law. So they will talk about that next. So what's next? So the registration deadline are expected to become law during summer next year, so 2023. It's maybe a bit late, but I think it's better than nothing, better late than never. So the process will be that they will be introducing a draft statutory instrument before Parliament, and then both houses of Parliament, the House of Commons and House of Lords, will then vote on this and debate it and vote on it. Then it will be signed into law by the Secretary of State and enter into force before 27th of October 2023. So end of by 27th of October next year, hopefully. And why this date? Because according to the current legal text, this is the date of the first registration deadline if there would be no extension. So obviously we would want to have this law in place before that. Otherwise there would be some minor issues, I think. But having discussed this predicament with DEFRA, they have said that they will, if there are any issues with the legal process, they would then put in place some sort of emergency legislation to implement these changes in time before this first registration deadline, October 27th, 2023, according to the current legal text. There's, of course, the potential for legal challenges and delays, but based on conversations with DEFRA, they seem confident that there will be no issues with that. However, of course, being not the devil's advocate, I think, but still being wanting to be prepared for all kinds of outcomes, I could identify the worst case scenario, albeit unlikely, as mentioned. If there would be, for whatever reason, some delay that the legal implementation of these extensions of the registration deadlines would go past the first registration deadline according to the current legal text, that would mean that companies would have to suddenly scramble to become a lead and co-registrant for the substances that they're placing on the market at over 1,000 tons, or if they are these CMR substances at 1 ton or more, and have those registrations done by, according to the full letter of the law, so a full registration with all the data requirements, etc., by this October 27th next year. This would, of course, have huge implications, both in terms of the need for expertise to do the registration and data access, which is the biggest pain point at the moment for UK REACH. But of course, this is unlikely to happen, but still good, I think, to identify and be aware of. So you will really need to follow the legislative process for introducing these registration deadlines, these changes into the law, the UK law. And I recommend only rejoicing once that has happened and it has happened on time. And of course, REACH law is following this in detail and will keep you up to date. And as soon as the changes are passed into law, we'll sure to have another webinar where we'll discuss things in more detail and probably send out a newsletter, etc. Okay, so now I will just hand it over again to Pietro. He will talk about the new registration of existing substances, or NRES, and how it works. So Pietro, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So let's start. Next slide, please. So NRES, as Frederick already said, NRES stands for New Registration of Existing Substance. So let's go with the next slide, please. So in basic, how does it work? So company that cannot benefit anymore or cannot benefit at all from the downstream user import notification or a grandfathering for a substance under the existing supply, because, for example, they're not done it within the deadline, must first register the substance before they can place the substance in the market at 1 ton or more per annum. However, if the substance had been already registered under the EU REACH framework by anyone, therefore is already an existing substance, the company might be able to, as part of the new registration of existing substance process, to defer the submission of a full information requirement to a later time, so that the company can then join the joint registration group and work in order to share the data and with other transitional registrants and grandfather registrants. So whatever the NRES process apply to you or not, the HSE, the UK authority, will communicate to you after you submitted the inquiry. So inquiry always have to take place in order to see if you are available or if you are allowed to proceed with this process. So next slide, please. So in order to be able to submit an NRES, as I said in the previous slide, an inquiry for the substance must need to be submitted to the HSE. So this is done by, similar to what happened with the EU REACH, by Article 26, as it is a mandatory step for the new registration, or any registration really. So any inquiry must be concluded before the registration work can begin. So what the inquiry does, basically the inquiry confirms the real value of the substance, so confirm the identity. So the HSE will then verify the identity of the substance. So once you submit that, your substance will be the same, or is confirmed to be the same of all the other substance within the substance group that have already been submitted within the comply with the UK REACH system. The inquiry dossier must include all the information that allow the correct identification of the substance, and this is usually done within the IUCLID section 1.4. Only once the HSE has accepted the inquiry, the submitting company and the substance will be placed in the substance group, which, if we go back to EU REACH, this was called the SIF. And the new registration process and NRES process can then continue. Next slide, please. So the process, how does it work? We're trying to make it as simple as possible for you. So apply. So first of all, you must inquire. So for all substances that are not under the existing supply chain, so whatever was not supplied between 2019 and 2020, then you need to perform this process. So inquiry under UK REACH Article 26 must be submitted to the authority, and you have to do this as soon as possible before the first supply or supplying the substance in the market at 1 ton or more per annum. So then you apply for part 1 of this called defer registration, where you must complete before implementing the substance in the market, and then at very much later stage you need to do part 2 of the submission, which it must be completed before the transitional tonnage ban deadline, which it depends on your case, so it's case by case. So only once part 1 has been submitted and accepted by the authority, the substance can then be placed in the market. So why this happened? Because obviously substance group are currently forming, but at the same time, after you complete part 1, you also pay the HSE registration fee. So this is why it will allow you then to perform the registration. So you're done with an asterisk because you still need to complete part 2 at a later stage. But the good news that once you complete part 1, you are allowed to import the substance or market the substance within the UK market. So next slide. technically, for part one, what you do, as I said, is called the fair registration. What is done, basically, company, after they done the inquiry, so they confirm the real identity of the substance they can perform this process by submitting a data waiver. And this is usually done within section 13.2 of the NRES dossier. This is for purpose of the deferring the submission. As I said, a full registration need to be submitted at a later stage. We included an example of a data waiver in this slide, which will be provided to all the participants. But basically, what you say is that you're currently unable to submit the relevant test data, and have not yet negotiated the access with the UK REACH process. Will also need to therefore negotiate. You're trying to do your best to negotiate with all the members of the substance group, and you will subsequently will provide this in due date. So this is also because in some substance group we noticed that, for example, lead registrants are not yet been assigned. So this is something to continue to monitor, but you do admit that you will do your best effort to complete the full registration. As I said on the previous slide, that will be part two within the specific tonnage umbrella. Next slide. Next slide, please. So this is just to show you a view of the comply with the UK REACH system of an example. So you can see the process is very easy to follow, and from our experience, we are really happy with the visual tool that is offered by the authorities. So very much kudos to the HSE. So you can see once your substance is registered, you can see easily within the comply with the UK REACH system how easy it is to follow the process and what step are completed. So in this example, with the fictional example, substance XYZ, you can see the substance registrations inquiry be submitted, and then you got the process, the business rule has been checked, and the technical completeness check also been completed, and then this next step will be at the stage for phase two of the registration that will take a later stage. But it's very easy to follow tools, and we're very happy with how the HSE have implemented, and they also take into account all the feedback provided by whoever helped to design the system. So very much happy with this. So thank you.
Thank you, Pietro. Okay, so now going ahead full steam and looking at the new registration model that was already touched upon briefly earlier. So what we know so far, and I can already give you a bit of a spoiler, it is very limited, but I'll come back to that. So just to give you some background, so the Secretary of State for the Environment announced back in December last year that DEFRA has committed to exploring alternative arrangements for UK REACH transitional registrations in order to support chemical businesses whilst upholding the highest standards to safeguard public health and the environment. So that's why DEFRA is now and has been working together with the HSE and the Environment Agency in the UK to explore this alternative model for registrations. And they've said that the model aims to reduce the need for replicating EU REACH data packages by placing greater emphasis on improving our understanding of the uses and exposures of chemicals in the context of Great Britain. And as mentioned, this is still work ongoing, so please keep that in mind. So, and as already alluded to, so this is very preliminary information based on nuggets of information from here and there, so please keep that in mind. It is highly speculative, so take it with a large pinch of salt, I guess is the proverb here. And also like to highlight that it is by no means certain that the new alternative registration model will prevail. There will be an alternative model. It can as easily be that the current full registration process will continue to apply. So only time will tell, and I'll tell you a bit about the timelines going forward. So as said, take it with a grain of salt. You've been warned. So essentially, we have identified 2 tracks as part of this new registration model, as of which one track is not new, but it is based on the existing model. And that track would apply for substances of high concern to the UK. And based on our understanding, what this means is practically substances of very high concern. So for these substances, the registration process would be as it is currently in the current legal text. So you need to provide the full data requirements according to the tonnage band you're registering and the type of substance. But the extended registration deadlines would apply. Then for substances of lesser concern to the UK, so these are not SVHCs, would go through a process of submitting a so-called substance hazard profile. The name may be different. We just call it substance hazard profile in this presentations. Earlier it was called substance hazard information profile SHIP, but I think they just dropped the information there at some point. So we'll just call it a hazard profile or substance hazard profile. And that is supposed to be based on publicly available data. And this profile, this registration, if you will also benefit, of course, from these extended registration deadlines. But on top of that, there is also an idea to submit company-specific risk assessments. So each company who subject to the registration requirement and goes through this hazard profile track would then also have to provide this specific risk assessment specific to their case, their users, and so forth. So what we know, or think we know, have heard, or believe we have heard, so please take that with a grain of salt as mentioned. So companies as part of the same group, so companies who inquired or submitted a grandfathering for the substance, which is of lesser concern to the UK market, need to agree on a hazard profile for the substance. And the idea with this hazard profile is that you demonstrate that the substance, what the substance properties are, and that you've assessed the hazards of the substance. This hazard profile would be populated with publicly available information without IPR issues. I'll come back to that. What that means, IPR is intellectual property rights, because it's just not just, you can't just go out and copy paste information from the internet. You have to have permission for that, even though it may be publicly available. And of course, then populated with data held within the substance group, so by the companies themselves who have inquired for the said substance and are then going ahead and preparing this hazard profile. It will be compiled in iEuclid. There may be a UK-specific template that will become available as part of this process. So when you compile it, you select that template and then populate the fields that are required, and then it will show what is not required. The joint submission concept will also apply, meaning that you would have a lead registrant who is then spearheading this effort to prepare the substance hazard profile. And likely they would submit this lead dossier, lead hazard profile on behalf of all the other companies, as is the case with the standard current registration process, albeit the data requirements would be significantly less. And of course, this lead registrant would have to be then, of course, elected in this substance group between the companies who are a member of that substance group. It would be submitted to the HSE as an iEuclid dossier. So you upload it to comply with UK REACH and go through the hoops in the system, which is not, of course, yet available, because all of this is very preliminary. And the HSE registration fee would apply, because this would essentially is a registration. They just call it a hazard profile. So it more like a description of what information is submitted versus what the legal definition for that information is. So it would be, in essence, a registration with limited data requirements. So this is, I would say, all we know at the moment. And information, as said, is very scarce. And this may change completely, so keep that in mind. Then also we had the second part of this new registration model for these, to our understanding, applicable to the substances of lesser concern, but may also be applicable to all substances. So even the SVHCs, we'll see how that pans out. So companies submitting this hazard profile, so the registration per se, for these lesser substances, lesser concern on the UK market, would then also have to submit a registrant, so a company business-specific risk assessment. So sometimes we've seen people call it like a specific chemical safety report, which is focusing specifically on the use and exposure of the substance in Great Britain. So it would be very important that the information is very useful for the GB context and not be generic and broad, as sometimes we hear the criticism that is the case for EU CSRs, which are sometimes very generic, very broad, and so forth. So it would be much more specific. I just hope they would go into the levels of detail that is required, for example, as part of authorization dossiers, but that's a different discussion. And it may also apply to lesser tonnage band substances, so 1 to 10 ton substances, which typically do not require a CSR. So that is interesting. It should have more registrant-specific data, as mentioned, included in this specific risk assessment compared with the EU REACH CSR. So more information on data and tonnage per use, where it is used in more detail in the supply chain. So the identification of the sites, number of sites, also provide evidence of Great Britain specific data and exposure information supporting the risk assessment. So this is where I have some small alarm bells ringing in my head, just hoping it will be kept at a very practical level and not go into the details of, for example, authorization use identification purposes. So but that's it, that's a different discussion. And also include information on waste disposal, recycling, and so forth. And also there was talk about market share, market outlook information, and so forth. But this is, as I said, very, very preliminary. And registrants should submit a confidential and a non-confidential version of this specific risk assessment. One would be then publicly available, and the other one would not. I assume that it would be eventually then also available, when it says publicly available, on the dissemination tool or similar, which will eventually also be applicable for UK REACH. And based on our understanding, this would also then be individually submitted by each registrant as part of their probably the risk assessment. The hazard profile that we talked about earlier, or maybe submitted separately to be determined. But this could be based on a common template of the joint submission. But again, very preliminary information. And I see this could be a bit of a pain to do in practice, especially for companies who have not done it in the past. But it all depends on the implementation, so we'll see. So companies would only need to provide the full data set if they're deemed to be of most concern on the UK market. So to our understanding, this means substances of very high concern, but to be determined, of course, again. So if we look at what this looks like in practice, compare it with the current process and the new registration model, then currently we have it as shown on the picture. So you have different feeds. Let's see if I can get the laser pointer working. Yes, so we have the grandfather registrations going into the substance group. We have the transitional registrations, so the ones that are subject to DUIN. And once you've prepared a DUIN and an inquiry, specifically the inquiry will be placed in the substance group, and the same applies for the NRES cases whereby you submit an inquiry, become a member of the substance group, but then you also submit a separate deferred registration. So all of these feed into the same joint submission, and then you prepare the registration according to the full data requirements, according to the current legal text, based on the tonnage band and type of substance, have your lead registrant and co-registrant and submitted by the applicable registration deadlines, which have now been or are in the process of being postponed, let's put it that way. However, looking at the new registration model, and I realize we're up with the 60 minutes, so apologies for going a bit over time, so thank you for hanging in there. And if you have to leave, please note that you can always watch this recording on YouTube. But if you're staying, we appreciate it very much. So the new registration model, in comparison, we have the same feeds, if you will, feeding into this joint, this substance group through inquiries or the grandfathering. But in this case, if it's a substance of high concern for the UK, then it would go through the normal process according to current legal text. But if it would be of lesser concern, then it would go through this hazard profile based on publicly available information, and then this registrant-specific risk assessment. But you would still have the lead registrant and member registrants, or co-registrants, as we like to call them, and they would need to be submitted by these extended registration deadlines. So this is our understanding currently, and keep in mind that this is, as I said, speculative to some degree. Okay, going forward. So the UK government is working on this new registration model essentially in two stages. The first stage being that they're determining how to get access to the hazard information without industry having to buy all these data packages. So this is by far the biggest pain point, I would say, in the process. And I would love to be a fly on the wall in those discussions when they are thinking about how to find this information free of charge and be able to use it. Anyway, the second part would be they would figure out how to improve the existing information about exposure and chemical substances on the UK market, essentially. And this is related to what level they would need to collect information related to particular uses of the substances and related exposure information. And this can be quite complicated, I would say, if they take it to a very specific level. But that's a topic for another time. And the UK government has said that they plan to unveil the new registration model during next year, so 2023, and then legislate this in 2024. So it means that there would be an update, a new statutory instrument would be introduced to cover the new registration model and introduced into law in 2024. But that said, these are the plans. But the government has also said in the UK that it does not yet know whether the new model will work, and that it will not compromise the level of protection for human health and the environment, which remain an absolute priority. So I would say that reading between the lines and maybe reading a bit into the tea leaves, if they cannot find a good process for obtaining enough data to be able to retain the protection of human health and the environment, they will just revert back to the original text of the UK REACH regulation, meaning you would have to register and buy the data as part of the joint submission and letter of accesses and so forth. So the full registration process, which at the end of the day probably would be easier because people know how that works. But that's just my personal opinion. So use of existing data and publicly available data as part of this new registration model is a bit of a problematic because you can't just use data freely from the internet. You have to have permission to do that. But maybe the following sources could be used for populating the dossier for these substances of lesser concern, meaning you just have the this hazard profile compiled. So in these cases, of course, existing EU REACH data owned by GB holders of EU REACH dossiers registrations where they actually own the data could be used, albeit this would not, I suspect, will not be free for use, except for the 12-year rule. We'll come back to that in just a sec. Then you could use published articles on substance endpoint information and so forth. But these are not free, but quite inexpensive where they're available. Then the 12-year rule. So it means that 12-year-old EU REACH study summaries, robust study summaries held and owned by GB-based companies, so they need to be in GB, can be used for free if they go over this 12-year-old threshold. And as of beginning of this month, we are actually just about 12 years plus from the first EU REACH registration deadline for the highest tonnage band. So there might be cases that we have information that could be used for free of charge, albeit I think we don't have that much across multiple substances. So just to note that the 12-year rule does not apply between these different legal jurisdictions, so it only applies in each jurisdiction in isolation. So what it means is that the 12-year rule for UK REACH could not grab information from EU REACH, even though the data may have been older, which is held outside of Great Britain. Okay, and then of course free publicly available data where IPR, so intellectual property rights, are not an issue, meaning that you can use it for free, but this is not very clear in the sense that you really need to verify case by case, can you actually use the information for free, and that can be quite painstaking. So, but if there is such information, which I'm sure there is to a very limited degree, I think that can be used for free for this purpose. Maybe the government even has some data they own, has some data they created, modeled, and so forth that can be used. To be determined, as said. So the use of publicly available data for free is, to say the least, a very tricky issue. And I'm really, at least personally, looking forward to seeing how this will be solved, if, as mentioned, solvable at all. So the fallback position is to go with a full registration and data sharing as in the current legal text. So that's if things become complicated, which things tend to become, the fallback position is the current legal text. And if I would be a betting man, I might bet that we would go according to the current legal text. But we'll see. It'll be interesting nonetheless. So the new UK REACH registration model is still in development. So this is very important to know and understand. And according to DEFRA, we will know more during next year. Unfortunately, we don't have more detailed information as to when during next year. They would not give that up, despite exerting a bit of pressure. But next year we will know more. And as maybe on a bit of an offshoot, DEFRA also recommends inquiring early in order to be able to follow what's going on in the substance group. So meaning who maybe wants to become a lead registrant and participate in the discussions on data sharing and more, regardless of the registration model. So regardless of how things develop, DEFRA recommends to inquire early to get into the process. And everyone has to inquire except for those who grandfathered the substance. Everyone else will have to inquire. So our recommendation, as well as DEFRA, just go ahead and do that as early as possible. Then at least you're not missing out on anything. Okay, coming to the conclusions before going to the Q&A. So just quickly, so UK REACH has entered into force already a few years ago. Transitional registration deadlines apply, as we've seen for DUIN's grandfathering and NRES cases, as we discussed. And as a result of a public consultation by DEFRA, the transitional registration deadlines will be extended then to 26, 28, and 30 based on depending on the substance type and the annual tonnages thereof. However, the deadline still has to be passed into UK law, which is expected to happen in summer next year, so 2023. And we definitely recommend you follow the legislative process closely and be ready to act accordingly. And of course, REACH law will be following this. So by following us, looking at LinkedIn, following our emails, newsletters, our webinars, you will be kept up to date. The new registration model is still under discussion, as mentioned. Very few information nuggets are available at the moment, but we will know that there will be more information next year, and they are looking to have this passed into law in the UK in 24. So it is, and I would like to highlight that it's by no means certain that the alternative registration model will prevail, and the current full registration process according to the current legal text, the same as we have in the EU REACH, may be the one that will be applicable at the end. Well, anyway, this needs to be followed, and we will do that likewise as with the registration deadline legal text passing into UK law issue. So in any case, regardless of the model, it is recommended to inquire early to get into the process, and this is something that DEFRA is pushing for. So please keep that in mind, and as mentioned, we are following at REACH law these developments closely. And so we definitely stand ready to help you, support you with your compliance efforts. So if you have any questions or want a quotation for specific topics or anything, just feel free to contact Pietro, myself, or REACH law general, just at sales@reachlaw.fi. A bit of shilling there, part of the mandatory free webinar. No free lunches, as we all know. Okay, coming to the Q&A part. So thank you very much for sticking around. And of course, thank you very much for the questions you've been submitting ahead of the webinar as part of the registration. And then during the webinar, I see that we already have quite a lot of new questions. So we just start with the ones we received. And I actually put these in the presentation just to have them here, albeit I've done some modification to the text to remove information that you might identify companies from and so forth. So the first question submitted in advance is this, goes as follows. Does the UK REACH system currently have the capabilities to actually support only representatives? How is it ensured that new registrants are able to find relevant registrations, joint submissions, other registrants? So here, I would recommend you also look at our previous webinars on the topics as mentioned earlier during this webinar in one of the slides. But capabilities, I mean, the capabilities are on the industry side, on the consultancy side, for example, REACH law. We have capabilities to support industry as an only representative. I'm sure other consultancies and so forth have the capability to do that. So it's not a capability issue, I would argue, on the government side. On the HSE side, it's more a capability issue on the industry side. And how you are supposed to find like other registrants is that you should, of course, if you need an OR, you would need to appoint one. Then this only representative determines whether you are eligible for the DUIN process, or do we have to go through the NRES process. But regardless of what the process is, you have to inquire. And our recommendation is to inquire as soon as possible so that you will be able to participate into the substance group and find other registrants and start discussing about data sharing and who becomes the lead registrant and so forth. So in the substance group, you find other registrants of the same substance. Then the next question, there is a proposal from UK government to revoke all legislation copied from EU legislation. I would like to know how UK REACH will be affected by this move. And Pietro, is this something you want to take?
Yes, of course. Thank you, and thank you very much for this question. So our standpoint is this is a very hypothetical scenario. So First and foremost, let's not forget that the UK authority helped to design the original EU REACH. So when the UK was part of the EU, so I would say that as far as so far we have encountered, even with the downstream user import notification deadline extension to become a late DUIN, the HSC have shown to the public and to all the downstream users a great pragmatism and also flexibility. So if this will happen, we don't know, but if it will happen, I would really expect a really good guidance to be provided by the HSC. So you won't be left there hanging, but trust the great pragmatism from the HSC. This is what I would say in reply to this question. Thanks.
Thank you, Pietro. And just to add to that, so that has the law has not passed, to my understanding, and it's still being debated. And I think DEFRA has mentioned that they will retain. The default will be to retain EU laws rather than revoke. So, and as Pietro mentioned, I would find it highly unlikely that they would revoke the UK REACH regulation, because they don't have the inclination to do that. There is nothing to let's say nothing tangible. Let's put it, nothing practical that would support such a thesis. So expect UK REACH to prevail and be here for the long run, and that is what DEFRA also has said several times. Okay, going forward, when are we expected to know the reply from the Scottish and Welsh governments as to whether they approve the extension of the deadlines? So, Pietro, do you want to take this one also?
Yeah, so we hope it will be soon, let's say potentially Q1 2023, but also as Frederick has highlighted in his slides, we will expect that this will take place definitely before the 27th of October 2023, which was the original first tonnage ban deadlines for above 1,000 tons per annum. So this is our expectation, but obviously the information has been received, so the next step is a legal step, is administrative, it will take time, but definitely will be within the 2023 before October. That's our assumption.
Thank you. Next question, what about an online tool similar to REACH IT? Where can lead registrants be seen? Well, we have alluded to this, but if Pietro, if you want to also take this one.
Yes, of course. So, the REACH IT, UK REACH IT, or as it's called, comply with the UK REACH system, is not fully there yet compared to the European ones. But if substance are inquired, you then become part of the substance groups. In some cases, you are actually able to see who's the lead registrants, but at this moment in time, there's not. The substance group are still forming, and the process is still forming. So the discussion will have to take place, but we will assume it will happen at a later stage. We're just not there yet.
Thank you, Pietro. So I'll take the next one. Oh, this will be quick. So if I have a new substance to notify, how should I report it or them? So so it depends on your case. As we already mentioned earlier, if you're going to place existing substances under existing supply on the UK market, meaning they have been imported in 2019 and 2020, or 2020, I mean, you can then benefit from the DUIN process. If not imported in 19 or 20, then you will have to go through the NRES process. So it is very case specific. So I would recommend in this case just to have a look at our earlier webinars, especially the late DUIN one, and then of course feel free to contact REACH Laws and discuss your specific case. We'll be happy, of course, to help you with that. Next question, what is the current status of possibilities to do registration without data? In other words, only with analytical information or in analytical data, and provide the complete full dossier later. So this, I would suspect, relates to NRES, so the new registration of existing substance, and the first phase thereof, meaning where you defer the registration to a later time and just submit essentially analytical information about your substance and the data waiver that Pietro talked about. So that is those are the possibilities. But other than that, if we are talking about the normal, let's say, registration, then you cannot submit an empty dossier essentially, because that would be against the legal text of UK REACH. Next question, number 7. How will EU REACH changes affect UK REACH? So obviously we are in a situation, as mentioned in the very beginning of this webinar, that we are undergoing the REACH review, where we will have big changes coming in for the EU REACH regulation pertaining to maybe a registration for polymers, hazard information, authorization process, and so forth. But that's expected in 27 or so. It is important to understand that UK REACH and EU REACH are completely different sets of legal regimes. So there are no interlinkages per se. They are not dependent upon each other anymore, because UK left the EU, and that is where the umbilical cord was severed, I would say. So UK REACH is free to develop in whatever way it wants, and the government in the UK and the people there want, and so does EU REACH. So there will be divergence. But I'm sure if they find that certain updates to EU REACH would be beneficial for UK REACH, then they could think about implementing similar type of changes to UK REACH. But that is to be determined. So all bets are off, so to speak. Going forward, so this is the second page. So 13 question in all. So question 8, a competitor of yours, I guess, advised to register first before going into discussions for a letter of access. In my eyes, this is this no longer bending the law, but eventually breaching it? So, okay, again, not knowing the details of the case, then cannot comment in any great detail, but I would assume that this may be a case of NRES again. And in this case, when you submit the first part, the deferred registration, then indeed you are submitting a registration without a letter of access. But eventually, when as part of an NRES or any other registration for that matter, even grandfatherings, you will have to join a joint submission and share the costs. And that is where you would buy a letter of access. Beyond that, I do not see how you could register without the letter of access. I don't know, Pietro, do you have anything to add? I guess not, but
no, not at all.
Yeah. Anyway, as mentioned earlier, if you the person asking, please feel free to contact us separately on this. We probably would need to know more details. Question 9, how far does UK REACH mirror EU REACH? Will UK REACH have a similar HVSC, substance very high concern designation system? So they do have, yes, because UK REACH is a copy of the EU REACH system. But of course, at the end of the day, what substances end up on the candidate list that are not there already or on the authorization list, there is then a matter for UK internal procedures. So they will determine what substances will be added to candidate list or the authorization list, and that will deviate, I'm pretty sure, from EU REACH, and it already has, because there are more substances on the candidate list in the EU than in the UK for the moment. So there will be deviations, albeit probably they will look at what's happening in the EU and consider including such substances also in the UK. But again, it is completely up to the UK, and there are no linkages, nothing mandatory for UK to do to mirror or follow the EU REACH. These are completely separate legal regimes, albeit stemming from the same source, from the same embryo of EU REACH, if you will. Okay, question number 10. I'd like to know, as someone outside of the UK, where is the best place to get information on the status of UK REACH? Well, my biased answer would be REACH Law webinars. But I think you could also, of course, look at the HCC website. You can subscribe to a government email where they will provide you with information about updates, and of course be active in the different associations and so forth. But I think the easiest is just to follow us at REACH. Question 11, will the HSC develop an ECHA-like portal to assist with the product stewardship, for example, assisting in the verification of registration numbers and holders? So I guess the person asking is referring to a dissemination tool type of a system. So Pietro, do you want to take this one?
Yes, I would expect this will happen. The comply with the UK REACH portal already offers some important information. If you submitted an inquiry, you can see the substance group members, and you can begin discussion already, if possible. Although everyone is sitting at the moment waiting for the deadlines definition. But yeah, this is something that pragmatically will take place for sure.
Thank you, Pietro. And the next to final question, how do we connect to all downstream users having the same substance to register to create a joint registration and lead registrant process? So, as mentioned earlier, you need to inquire to become member of the substance group, and from there, cooperate in preparing the registration, whatever that registration process will be. But you will need to inquire, so do that rather sooner than later, as DEFRA is recommending. And last question of the pre-submitted questions. There were a lot more, but the questions we have not included here have been answered in the presentation, I think, adequately earlier. So that's why they are not here. Will the chemical safety reports that prepared under EU REACH be reusable for UK REACH? So yes, if the registration process as such is kept as such, then of course you can reuse these chemical safety reports, albeit you might need to do a subset analysis of the uses applicable in the UK and that related information. But that is remains to be seen. But you can definitely use some, or if not all, information from those CSRs for UK REACH purposes. Okay, so just grabbing a few questions from the online chat. Because as you can see on the clock, we're already running a lot over time, so apologies again for that. Next time I promise to actually have 90 minutes in the estimated time for the webinar. Okay, just picking a few. Okay, there was a question. Is the law discussion and agreement required before registration, or can it be postponed after the own registration? So again, for NRES cases, yes. In all other cases, the answer would be no. Unless, of course, you're the sole registrant for that substance, and then, of course, you would be the lead registrant, and you would anyway have to do the work, but you would not have to buy a letter of access because you would be owning the data you submit. Then we have a question: do we legally have to update volume information in a DUIN submitted to the HSC, especially if our import volumes have increased? Do you want to take this Pietro? And I think we have some experience on this.
Yes, so obviously I would recommend to always trying to be up to date, and from our discussion we had with the HSC with some of those cases, it's always better to come forward and try to provide the most up-to-date data. So yes, I would recommendation from us is to always submit a new DUIN update spreadsheet to the authorities. They are very, very quick. There is a specific department that take care of the downstream user import notification, and reply is within few working days. But at the end of the day, the main thing is to comply within your tonnage band deadlines, but gain the data send to the authorities is always the best thing to do, not sit on the fence. If you know, do apply.
Very good, thank you. Then I will take this. This will be, unfortunately, just the final question. And I promise to come back to all the ones who've submitted questions. I see that some are a bit trickier, so we'll get back to you on those. And if we feel very generous, we'll just create a Q&A document for these. No promises, though. Okay, the last question. Would a HSE registration fee apply even if the NRES has already been done? So as part of the NRES process, the first part, so the deferred registration, you actually will pay the HSE fee. So you've already paid it. So you will not have to pay it again when you join the joint submission. So you only have to pay the registration fee once. Yeah, I think we will have to cut it there. We're already 30 minutes past the hour, so to speak. So thank you very much for attending this webinar. Thank you for your kind words in the chat. We appreciate that very much. So thank you very much again for your attention. Please feel free to contact us for any additional support. If you need a quotation for any of our services and so forth, feel free to contact us, myself or Pietro directly. You'll see our contact details on the screen. And of course, I wish you a very nice day, and I hopefully also you have it more warm than we have it here in Finland, which we have now minus 12 degrees centigrade. So anyway, I wish you a very nice day and be safe.